Chapter 2 The Marketplace. The grass fell before the jail in Prison Lane on a certain summer morning not less than 2 centuries ago was occupied by a very large number of the inhabitants of Boston, all with their eyes intently fastened on the iron clamped oaken door. Amongst any other population, or at a later period in the history of New England, the weird that petrified the bearded physiognomies of these good people would have augured some awful business in hand. It could have betokened nothing short of the anticipated execution of some noted culprit, on whom the sentence of a legal tribunal had but confirmed the verdict of public sentiment. But in that early severity of the Puritan character, an inference of this kind could not so undoubtedly be drawn. It might be that a childish bondservant, or an unloved child, when his parents had given over the civil authority, was to be corrected at the whipping post. It might be that antinomian, a Quaker or other orthodox religionist, was to be scourged out of the town, or an idle and vagrant Indian, whom the white man's firewater had made riotous about the streets, was to be driven with the strippers into the shadow of the forest. It might be, too, that a witch, like old Mistress Higgins, the bitter-tempered widow of the magistrate, was to die upon the gallows. In either case, there was very much the same solemnity of demeanour on the part of the spectators, as befitted a people amongst one religion and law were almost identical, and in whose character both were so strongly interfused, that the mildness and the severest acts of the public discipline were alike made venerable and awful. Margaret, indeed, and cold, was the sympathy that a transgressor might look for, from such bystander as the scaffold. On the other hand, a penalty which, in our days, would infer a degree of making infamy and ridicule, might then be invested with almost as certain a dignity as the punishment of the death itself. It was a circumstance to be noted, on the summer morning when our story begins its course, that the women of whom there were several in the crowd appeared to take a particular interest in whatever penal infliction might be expected to ensue. The age had not so much refinement that any sense of impropriety restrained the weirdness of petticoat and farthingale from stepping forth into the public ways, and when there are not unsubstantial persons, if occasion were, into the thrown nervous to a scaffold at an execution. Morally, as well as material, there was a cursed fever in those wives and maidens of all English birth and breeding, that in their first descendant separated from them by a series of the 6 or 7 generations. For, through that chain of ancestry, every successive mother has transmitted to her child a fainter bloom, a more delicate and brief beauty, and a higher physical frame, if not a character of less force and solidity than her own. The women who were now standing about the prison door stood within less than half a century of the period when the man like Elizabeth had been the not altogether insurable representative of the sex. They were her countrywomen, and the beef and the ale of their native land, with a moral diet not a whit more refined, entered largely into their composition. The bright morning sun, therefore, shone on broad shoulders and well-developed busts, and unrotten and ruddy cheeks that had ripened in the far off island. In her hardly yet warm pallor or thinner in the atmosphere of New England, there was moreover a boldness unworthy of speech among these matrons, as none of the ten seemed to be, that would startle us at the present day, whether in respect to its purport or its volume of tone. "Good wives," said a hair-featured dame of 50, "I'll tell ye a piece of my mind. It would be greatly for the public behoof if we women, being of mature age and church-members in good repute, should have the hand of such malefactresses as this Hester Prynne. What think ye, gossips, if the Hussites stood out the judgment before outside, that are now here and then not together, which came up with such a sentence as the worshipful magistrates have augured? Marry, I trow not. People say, ano- people say, said another, that the Reverend Minister Disdale, her godly pastor, takes very grievously to heart that such a scandal should have come upon his congregations. The magistrates are God-fearing gentlemen, but merciful overmuch. That is a truth, added the third Ottoman matron. At the very least they should have put the brand of the hot iron on Hester Prynne's forehead. Madame Hester would have winced at that, I warrant me; but she, the naughty baggage, little will she care what they put upon the body side of the gown. Why, look you, she may cover it with a brush, or such like heathenish adornment, so walk the street as brave as ever. Ah, but, interposed more softly a young wife, holding a child by the hand, let her cover the mark as she will, the pain of it will be always in her heart. What do we talk of marked brands, whether on the bodice of her gown, on the flesh of her forehead? Cried another female, the ugliest as well as the most pitiless of these self-constituted judges. This woman was brought to shame upon us all, and ought to die. Is there not law for it? Truly there is, but in the Scripture and the statute book. Then let the magistrates who have made it of no effect than themselves if their own wives and daughters go astray. Mercy of us, good wife! Exclaimed a man in the crowd. Is there no virtue in woman, save what springs from a wholesome for fear of the gallows? There is the hardest word yet. Hush, now, gossip, for the look is turning in the prison door, and here comes Mr. Prynne herself. The door of the jail being flung open from within, there appeared in the first place, like a black shadow emerging into the sunshine, the grim and grisly presence of the town devil, with a sword by his side and his staff of office in his hand. This personage reflected and represented in his aspect the whole dismal severity of the Puritanic code of law, which it was his business to administer in this final and closest application to the offender. Stretching forth the official staff in his left hand, he laid his right upon the shoulder of a young woman, whom he thus drew forward, until, on the threshold of the prison door, she repelled him by an action marked with natural dignity and force of character, and stepped into the open air, as if by her own free will. She bore in her arms a child, a baby, of some 3 months old, who winked and turned aside its little face from the too vivid light of day, because its existence heretofore had brought it acquainted only with the grey twilight of a dungeon or other darksome apartment of the prison. When the young woman, the mother of this child, stood fully revealed before the crowd, it seemed to be her first impulse to clasp the infant closely to her bosom, not so much by an impulse of motherly affection, as that she might thereby conceal a certain token which was wrought or fastened into her dress. In a moment, however, Wesley, judging that one token of her shame would but poorly serve to hide another, she took the baby on her arm, and, with a burning blush, and yet a haughty smile, and a glance that would not be banished, looked around at her townspeople and neighbors. On the breast of her gown, in the fine red cloth, surrounded with an elaborate embroidery and fantastic flourishes of gold thread, appeared the letter A. It was artistically done, and with so much fertility and gorgeous luxuriance of fancy, that it had all the effect of a last and fairy decoration to the apparel which she wore, and which was of a splendour in accordance with the taste of the age, but rarely beyond that was allowed by the some sumptuary regulation of the colony. The young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of feature and richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. She was ladylike, too, after the manner of the feminine gentlery of those days, characterized by a certain state of dignity rather than by the delicate, evanescent, and undescribable grace which is now recognized as its indication. And never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike, in the antique interpretation of the term, than as she used from the prison. Those who had before known her, and had expected to behold her dimmed and obscured by a distraught cloud, were astonished and even started to perceive how her beauty shone out, and made a halo of the misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. It may be true that to a sensitive observer there was something excessively painful in it. Her attire, which indeed she had wrought for the occasion, imprisoned and had modelled much after her own fancy, seemed to express the attitude of her spirit, the desperate recklessness of the mood, by its wild and picturesque peculiarity. But the point which read all eyes, and, as it were, transfigured the wearer, so that both men and women, who had been familiarly acquainted with Hester Prynne, were now impressed as if they beheld for the first time. Was that Scarlet there, so fantastically embroidered and illuminated upon her bosom? It had the effect of a spell, taking her out of the ordinary relation with humanity, and enclosing her in a spirit by herself. She she had good skill at her needle, that is certain, remarked one of the female spectators. But did ever woman, before this braced beauty, contrive such a way of showing it? Why, gossip, what is but to lie in the faces of our goodly magistrates, and make a pride out of what they, worthy gentlemen, meant for a punishment? It were well muttered the monks iron visage of the old dames. If we stripped down his rich gown off her dainty shoulders, and as for the red letter which she had stitched curiously, I bestowed a rag of mine own rheumatic plain to make a fitter one. "Oh, peace, neighbours, peace!" whispered the youngest companion. "Do not let her hear you. Not a stitch in that embroidered letter, but she has felt it in her heart." The grim devil now made a gesture with his staff. "Make way, good people, make way! In the king's name!" cried he. "Open a passage, and I promise ye, Mistress Prime shall be set where man, woman, and child may have a fair sight of her brave appearance, from this time in an hour past meridian. A blessing of the richest colony of the Massachusetts, where inquiry is dragged out into the sunshine. Come along, Madam Hester, and show your scarlet letter in the market-place." A lane was forthwith opened through the throng of spectators, preceded by the Earl, and attended by an irregular procession of stern-browed men and uncomely-visaged women. Hester Prynne set forth towards the place appointed for her punishment. A crowd of eager and curious schoolboys, understanding little of the matter in hand, except that it gave them a half-holiday, ran before her progress, turning their heads continually to stare into her face, and at the winkling baby in her arms, and at the ingenuous letter on her breast. It was no great distance, in those days, from the prison door to the market-place. Measured by the prisoner's experience, however, it might be reckoned a journey of some length, for, haughty as her demeanour was, she perchance underwent an agony from every footstep of those that thronged to see her, as if her heart had been flung into the street for them all to spurn and trample upon. In our nature, however, there is a provision alike marvellous and merciful, that the sufferer should never know the intensity of what he endures by this present torture, but shall fly by the pang that rankles after it, with almost a certain deportment. Therefore, Hester Prynne passed through this portion of her ordeal, and came to a sort of scaffold at the western extremity of the market-place. It stood nearly beneath the Ives of Boston, Early Church, and appeared to be featured there. In fact, this scaffold constituted a portion of the penal machine, which now, for 2 or 3 generations past, had been merely historical and traditionary among us, but was held in the old time to be as effectual an agent in the promotion of good citizenship as ever was the guillotine among the terrorists of France. It was, in short, the platform of the pillory, and above it rose the framework of that instrument of discipline, so fashioned as to confine the human head in its tight grasp, and thus hold it up to the public gaze. The very ideal to ignominy was embodied and made manifest in this contrivance of wood and iron. There can be no trace, methinks, against our common nature, whatever be the delinquency of the individual, no outrage more flagrant than to forbid the culprit to hide his face for shame, as it was the essence for this punishment to do. In Hester Prynne's instance, however, as not unfrequently in other cases, her sentence bore, that she should stand a certain time upon the platform, but without undergoing that gripe about the neck and confinement of the heads, the proneness to which was the most devilish characteristic of this ugly ancient. Knowing well her part, she ascended a flight of wooden steps, and was thus displayed to the surrounding multitude, at about the height of a man's shoulder above the street. Had there been a Papist among the crowd of Puritans, he might have seen in this beautiful woman, so picturesque in her attire and mien, and with the infant at her bosom, an object to remind him of the image of divine maternity, which so many illustrious painters have built with one another to represent something which should remind him, indeed, but only by contrast, of that sacred image of sinless motherhood, whose infant was to redeem the world. Here there was the tide of deepest sin in the most sacred quality of human life, working such effect that the world was only the darker for this woman's beauty, and the more lost for the infant that she had borne. The scene was not without a measure of awe, such as must always invest the spectacle of beauty and shame in a field of creation, before society shall have grown corrupt enough to smile, instead of should daring at it. The witnesses of Hester Prynne's disgrace had not yet passed beyond their simplicity. They were stirred enough to look upon her death, had that been the sentence without a murmur at its severity, but had none of the heartlessness of another social state, which would find only a time for jest in exhibition like the present, even had there been a disposition to turn the matter into ridicule. It must have been repressed and overpowered by the solemn presence of men no less dignified than the governor, and several of his councillors, a judge, a general, and the minister of the town, all of whom sat or stood in a balcony of the meeting-house, looking down upon the platform, when such personages could constitute a part of the spectacle, without risking the majesty or reverence of rank and office. It was safely to be inferred that the infliction of a legal sentence would have an earnest and effectual meaning. Accordingly, the crown was sombre and grave. The unhappy culprit sustained herself as best a woman might, under the heavy weight of 1,000 overlapping eyes, all fastened upon her, and concentrated at her bosom. It was almost intolerable to be born of an impulsive and passionate nature. She had fortified herself to encounter the stings and venomous stab of the public contumely, wreaking itself in every variety of insult. But there was a quality so much more terrible in the solemn mood of the popular mind, that she longed rather to behold all these bright countenances concerned with scornful merriment, and herself the object, had a roar of laughter burst from the multitude. Each man, each woman, each little schoolboy child, contributing their individual parts. Hester Prynne might have repaired them all with a bitter and disdainful smile. But under the little infliction which it was her doom to endure, she felt, at moments, as if she must needs shriek out with the full power of her lungs, and cast herself from the scaffold down upon the ground, or else go mad at once. Yet there were intervals when the whole scene in which she was the most conspicuous object seemed to vanish from her eyes, or, at least, glimmer indistinctly before them. like a mass imperfectly shaped of an spectral image. Her mind, and especially her memory, was preternaturally active, and kept bringing up other scenes that he surrounded when a street of a little town on the edge of a western wilderness, other faces that were lowering upon her from beneath the brims of those steeple-crowned hats, reminiscences, the most trifling and immaterial passages of infancy and school days, sports, childish carols, and the little domestic grace of her maiden years came swarming back upon her, intermingled with recollection of whatever was graves in her subsequent life, one picture precisely as vivid as another, as if all were as if all were of similar importance, or all alike at play. Possibly it was an instinctive device of her spirit to relieve itself, by the exhibition of these phantasmagoric forms, from the cruel weight and hardness of the reality. Be that as it might, the scaffold of the pillory was a point of view. They revealed to Hester Prynne the entire track along which she had been treading since her happy infancy. Standing on that miserable eminence, she saw again her native village in Old England, and her paternal home, a decaying house of grey stone, with a poverty-stricken aspect, but retaining a half-obliterated shell of her of arms over the portal, in token of antique gentlery. She saw her father's face, with its bald brow irreverent with birth, that flowed over the old-fashioned Elizabethan robe; her mother, too, with the look of heedful and anxious love which it always wore in her remembrance, and which, even since her death, had so often laid the impediment of gentle remonstrance in her daughter's pathway. She saw her own face, glowing with girlish beauty, and illuminating all the interior of the dusky room in which she had been wont to gaze at it. There she beheld another countenance, of a man well stricken in years, a pale, thin, scholar-like visage, with eyes dim and blurred by the lamplight that had suffered them to power over many ponderous books. Yet those same bleared optics had a strange, penetrating power when it was their owner purposed to read the human soul. This figure of the starry and the cloister, as Hester Prynne's womanly fancy failed not to recall, was slightly deformed, with the left shoulder a trifle higher than the right. Next rose before her, in memory's picture gallery, the intricate and narrow throat throughout Paris, the tall great houses, the huge cathedrals, and the public edifices, ancient in date and quaint in architecture of a continental series, where a new life had awaited her, still in connection with the misshapen scholar, a new life, but feeding itself on time-worn material, like a tough green moss on a crumbling wall. Lastly, in lieu of these shifting scenes, came back the rude marketplace of the Puritan settlement, with all the townspeople assembled and levelling their stern regards at Hester Prynne, yes, at herself, who stood on the scaffold of the pillory, an infant on her arm, and the letter A in scarlet fantastically embroidered with gold thread upon her bosom. Could it be true? She clutched the child so fiercely to her breast that it sent forth a cry, She turned her eyes downward at the scarlet letter, and even touched it with her finger, to assure herself that the infant and the chain were real. Yes, these were realities. All else had vanished.